Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be covering topics under Standard 2.2 in 3rd grade. We're also going to be covering topics under the Study Island lesson, Estimate Solutions. So today we're going to be doing a lot of rounding and estimating. So if these problems don't tell you what place value to round to, start with the highest place value, try the problem that way, see if you get a good answer, and if that doesn't work, then try the next place value down. And we're going to be doing some notes to help you with these problems, so please copy those down, copy down some example problems. Those notes are only going to help you. And if I go too fast while you're taking those notes, just pause the video and rewind so you can get caught back up. And you can even pause at the beginning of a question, work the problem out completely on your own, and then watch the video so that you can check yourself to see if you get the problem right or if there's still some areas that you need to work on. And so I'm so glad that you are joining us today, and let's go ahead and take some notes.
Here are some general strategies for rounding if they tell you which number to round to. If not, like they do in the majority of Study Island problems, then I'm going to give you some tips for when they don't tell you also. So if they do tell you what place value to round to, you're going to underline that place value. Then you're going to circle the digit to the right because it is always right about rounding. It's going to tell you what to do. And then you're going to focus on the number in the circle and sing the song. If that number is 1, 2, 3, 4, round it down through the floor. If the number's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, round it up, it'll be just fine. So if you have the number circled and it is a 1, 2, 3, or 4, you want to put a round down arrow to tell you that the number that's underlined stays the same. However, if the number that's circled is a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, you want to place an arrow above that shows you to go up. So this one would round to 700. And so the circle also reminds you that you're going to turn it and everything else to the right of it to a 0. And here's some other examples of how to use this strategy also. These first problems, they're going to have us estimate a product. And so when you're estimating a product in these examples, they're going to want you to do a range of numbers typically in the answer. So that means they want to have, it's going to be between two numbers. So to find out which numbers it's between, you're going to look at the highest place value of each number, and you're going to round each of those numbers up and multiply that, and round each of these numbers down and multiply those two numbers. So I'll show you what that looks like. So my highest place value is an 8 here. So I'm going to underline it. And if I round down, that means the 8 stays the same. So 83 would round to 80. However, if I round that 8 up, it would go to a 9, and I fill in my zeros, and that means it would round up to 90. And so that's the rounded down and rounded up number. And I'm going to do the same thing with the 68. I'm going to be looking at 6. And if I round down, that means the 6 stays the same, and I fill in zeros, that would be 60. If I round up, that 6 is going to become a 7, and I fill in a 0, and that means it rounds up to 70. So 68 is between 60 and 70, which is true. So then I just take those two smaller numbers and I multiply them. And I take the two bigger numbers and I multiply them. And so some tricks when you're multiplying by numbers that end in 0 is you can multiply those numbers at the beginning, which here would be 8 times 6, which is 48. And then you can count up the number of zeros in the problem. So there's 2 zeros here, so I put 2 zeros on my answer. And that means that my answer here can be no smaller than 4,800. And I'm going to do the same thing with 90 times 70. So I can multiply those first two numbers, which is 9 and 7. 9 times 7 is 63. And then I need to count up the zeros. So 1, 2, and I write in 2 zeros. And that is 6,300. So that means my number can't be over 6,300. So that means my answer here would be between 4,800 and 6,300. This problem here is very similar. I'm going to round to the highest place value, which is both 8s. And so if I round down, that 8 will stay the same, and so these would both round to 800. And then if I round up, that 8's going to become a 9. So each of these numbers would become 900. Then I take each of the smaller numbers, which is 800 and 800, and multiply them. And take each of the bigger numbers and multiply those. Remember, I can multiply the non-zero numbers, which is 8 times 8 here, which is 64. And then I can count up the number of zeros that are in the problem, which is 4. So I'm going to add 4 zeros to my answer. So that means my bottom bound, my numbers can't be any smaller than 640,000. And I'm going to do the same thing with 900 times 900. I can take all of the numbers that aren't zeros at the beginning and multiply those. So 9 times 9 is equal to 81. And then I can count up the number of zeros that are in the problem. That's 4, so I'm going to add 4 zeros to my answer. And that would be 810,000. So that means my answer can't be bigger than 810,000. So it has to be between 640,000 and 810,000, which is going to make my final answer D. This next problem is estimating in a word problem. It says Lance went to the store and bought 7 boxes of onions. Each box contained between 40 and 45 onions. What is the reasonable total amount of onions that Lance bought? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the smallest number, 40, and multiply it by 7. And that's going to give me the smallest possible number of onions that Lance could buy. So I'm going to take 7 times 0 is 0, and then 7 times 4 is 28. So that means that my answer cannot be below 280. And I'm going to do the same thing with 45 times 7, because that's going to tell me the biggest possible number of onions Lance could have bought. So 5 times 7 is 35. Carry the 3. 7 times 4 is 28, plus the 3 is 31. So that means he could have bought up to 315 onions, but not any more than that. So if I look at my answers, 265 is smaller than 280, so it's not between these two numbers. So it can't be A. 330, it's too big. It's bigger than 315. It's not between those two numbers, so it can't be B. 272 is too small, so it can't be C. And then 297 is right in between these two numbers. So that's the only number between them, so that means my answer D is going to be my final answer. Now I'm going to be looking at estimating division problems. So to estimate a quotient, which is the answer to a division problem, you're going to round the digit to the highest place value of each number. So in this problem, that would be 9 and 3. However, unlike multiplication, you're going to take the rounded down number and the rounded up number and divide them. And then you'll take the rounded up number and the rounded down number and divide those. And here you can see in this answer, you didn't actually have to work it out. You just have to know which two numbers are paired with them. So if I look at the 9 in the first problem, if I round that up, or if I round that down, the 9 will stay the same, and that'll round down to 900. If I round it up, that 9 will become a 10, and it'll round up to 1,000. And the 38, if I round the 3 down, that a 3 will stay the same, and it'll round down to 30. However, if I round the 3 up to a 4, that rounds up to 40. And so now this is when I take the rounded down number and the rounded up number, which is 940 here, and divide those. And then I take the bigger number divided by the smaller number to get the upper number. And that's going to make my final answer B. Here's a similar problem. Once again, I'm going to underline my highest place value because that's what I'm going to be rounding up and down to. So if I round the 6 down in 628, that's going to be stay 6, so it'll be 600. And if I take the 6 and I round it up, it's going to round up to a 7, so that would be 700. And then do the same with the 4 and 43. So if I round down, the 4 will stay the same, and that'll become 40. But if I round up, the 4 will become a 5, and that's a 0. And then here, remember, you take the rounded down number with the rounded up number, and those are the two numbers that you divide to find your smallest and biggest number in the range of possible answers. So that means I would take 600 and divide it by 50, and I would take 700 and divide it by 40. And that is going to make my final answer D. Here, you can see in the problem, it no longer has the division problems that will get you the range. It has the actual range. So to do these problems, it's a little bit different. I'm dividing by 8. And it's hard to round a single digit number. So when you're doing multiplication and division problems, estimating them. So I'm going to leave the 8 the same, but I'm going to look at numbers that would be easy to divide into that are close to 557 that I could easily divide 8 into. So I'm going to go ahead and start by listing multiples of 8. So that would be 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, and then 64 and 72. And so I can see I'm not getting to 557 anytime fast. So I can try adding a 0 to each of these and seeing if any of those are close to 557. And when I do that, I see that 560 is just 3 away. And so that means to estimate this, I can take 560 and divide that by 8. And so I look, 56 divided by 8 is 7, and then I tack on that 0 that came with the 560, and that means 560 divided by 8 is 70. 70 is between 65 and 75, so that means D is going to be my final answer. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.